She put me on the piano bench at 3 years old. Competed in many of these sort of statewide piano competitions. The issue was I never won a single competition. You know, what that taught me is it really is passion that distinguishes the best from the beginners.
Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. Welcome back, Superclusters fans, and today we have the third competitive swimmer we've had on the show, and I imagine won't be the last. Charlotte Zhang is the Senior Portfolio Manager for Inatai Foundation, and that is spelled INATAI, a philanthropy dedicated to ensuring equity and racial justice across the state of Washington, which started when Kaiser Permanente acquired Group Health Cooperative and then funded Inatai in 2017. Charlotte herself has been a capital allocator for over a decade across celebrated institutions like Iconic Capital, Vernal Point Advisors, and Medley. She's also a proud member of the Bridge Selection Committee, where she's privy to an unparalleled amount of deal flow. We tread fertile ground today, and as we talk about how Charlotte first competed in both piano and swimming, the 4 Ps to evaluating investments: people, philosophy, process, and performance. I do promise that we go much deeper into that, but that's the tease. And the last of which, what the minimum viable set of processes look like to build a multi-billion-dollar portfolio from scratch. You heard that right, from scratch. So, Charlotte, I cannot spell my excitement for today, and I want to say, out of all the in-person catch-ups we've had to date, this is our first conversation where we are in 2 dimensions, as opposed to 3. Nevertheless, without further ado, Charlotte, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, David. I'm really excited to be here, and 2 times in 1 week. That's a real privilege.
I know. Well, you're still in the secrets here. Like, we're not supposed to tell the listeners all these, things we sweep under the rug. But nevertheless, it is an absolute privilege. And so we can start in a lot of places. I want to start from your childhood. And I'm curious, as someone who's grown up with immigrant parents and have publicly talked about how their pursuit of the American dream has inspired your journey, at the same time as someone who's served in your student government since high school, what do you think people should understand about your early childhood or upbringing to fully appreciate the Charlotte that's sitting in front of us today?
Wow, you weren't kidding when you said you do your background research, but
I try. I really try.
No, it's very, very impressive. Well, I guess to share with the audience, so my parents came here to escape communism in China. They brought very little, so they had $40 in their pocket, 2 suitcases in hand, and this really nebulous idea of what the American dream could be. When they first arrived here, my dad was supporting us on an $800 a month graduate student stipend. So as you can imagine, stretched a little bit thin to try and support our family of 3. So we really relied on welfare to survive in those early days. I would say that because I personally come from these humble beginnings, it gives me that extra, I think, empathy and resonating with underdogs. I have a very poignant appreciation for just how far hustle can get you. And I'm probably a bit more willing to stick my neck out to expand access to opportunities for underserved demographics. And the way that shows up, right, is the reason why I was so excited to join Inatai, which from a mission standpoint, funds racial justice and social equity initiatives across Washington state. But then also, right, the reason why I tend to lean into evaluating and backing emerging managers. For example, in our portfolio at Inatai, we actually began investing in the funds 1 or 2 of 13 of our GPs in the portfolio.
That's amazing. I want to take a step back, and I promise we'll put a bookmark in Inatai and emerging managers because, let's be honest, that's what Superclusters is all about. But we'll hold it at bay for just a second. I want to go back to when your dad was supporting you on like an $800 stipend, graduate student stipend. What did that look like for the day to day for you as you were going through school in the early days?
It meant being very scrappy in terms of figuring out how we could bridge the resources that I needed, right, to complete school. So, we tried not to buy many things. So, borrowed a lot of books from libraries all across the county. And when it came to, I think, just material things. I guess I could never really develop much of an attachment to them because that just wasn't part of what we were used to having very much of. But that being said, I think that also we found a lot of my parents actually, even though they're atheist, they had encouraged me to go to church from an early age to find a sense of community, as they didn't have right any extended family to root our sense of belonging when they had first come to the States. And so, from a lot of the church events, I saw how giving the folks were, and they were always willing to lend a helping hand. And yeah, I think I saw a lot of human kindness in those early days, which has probably affirmed my belief in we are all generally good, and it is worth funding sort of these opportunities that allow people to really reach their full potential. And yes, that's what I would say came out of those kind of harder early days.
In the things you were doing for your community and seeing in your community, were there early signs where you were noticing, let's say, telltale signs of excellence or potential that you carry on till today?
Well, I think it does actually help to have a saber-toothed tiger mom. So,
That is the first time I've heard it explained that way, and I am going to steal it.
yes. So my mother is someone who really prides herself on instilling discipline into us as a family, and so from a very young age, she had this attitude of telling me, one, if you're going to do anything, you have to do it well. Right? You don't just go through the motions. And two, to be grateful for the opportunity to do certain things because, right, not everyone has those opportunities. She put me on the piano bench at 3 years old. So I was playing Beethoven by 5, and in high school, I actually competed in many of these sort of statewide piano competitions. The issue was I could always place kind of in the honorable mention category, but I
Uh-huh.
never won a single competition. And I think that, what that taught me is executional excellence can kind of get you to being great at something. Like, let's call that, I don't know, top quartile, right?
Okay. You're using
But
venture terms already.
exactly. Um, But it really is passion that distinguishes the best from great, right? So let's call that, I don't know, top decile, if you will. So essentially, right, when you watched me play the piano, my mind and body just never fully connected to the expression of the instrument in the way that the winners would, right? For them, it was almost hard to detect like where their fingers ended and the keyboard began. But for me, it never felt authentic to truly express myself in that way. But executionally, right, I could hit all the notes exactly correctly. And so I think from this very early experience, it gave me the recognition of how passion plays a critical role in achieving excellence, right? And the way that it actually now shows up in my work today is I think of that as being this is like table stakes when you're trying to select for both people that you're recruiting to your own team, but also, right, the investors that you're hoping to back in a portfolio. Passion is non negotiable because it really fuels that drive to sustain excellence.
But in a past life, you were also a competitive swimmer. There are a couple things. One, to do any sport or to do anything competitively or professionally is a costly game to be a part of. And then two, was there anything, and there might be similar threads to piano as a whole, but was there anything about swimming that drew you towards that maybe piano didn't tug at the same heartstrings on?
I think so, because to be honest, for swimming, I didn't end up being the best for a different reason. It was because I stopped growing at a certain point, and so
Height matters in sports,
you
especially in
know,
swimming.
what are you gonna do about it, right? God doesn't give with both hands. Um, and it did get to a point where so 8 and under, I was incredibly competitive. So I was probably swimming at like the zone level, and my stroke was breaststroke, which to be fair. Does benefit a lot more from your technical precision rather than being sort of like a pure power stroke. Like butterfly, I would say, is more so of a power stroke. Um, but I would say that, in terms of, I guess the reason why I was a bit more drawn to it was for me, we always had swim practice at the end of the day. And so I remember when I jumped into the pool, it was kind of my safe space to clear out my mind. That was a time in which, right, I didn't really have to think. And it was incredibly silent
Uh-huh.
inside of my head. And it was just about, right, pushing more so through kind of like the physical difficulty of swimming really long distances. And so that to me was very comforting and provided almost like a bit of solace from my day to day existence, which is as an introvert, I'm oftentimes in my head, right? So there's a lot of internal dialogue, a lot of like constant thinking, and so swimming was a really welcomed respite from that for me. In terms of sacrifice and what it took. So I would practice for on average 2 hours every day, and uh, I had started off in Rhode Island, where of course the facilities were indoors and so much more temperature controlled. Unfortunately, when I moved to Florida, all of the facilities are outdoors, um, and you wouldn't think it, but during the winter. Um, it gets incredibly freezing in that pool, to the point where when I would come out of the pool, my lips would actually be completely blue and purple.
Put a pin on kind of like that 50-degree pool water. It doesn't sound like much to probably a lot of folks listening, but it feels like the equivalent of spending 2 hours swimming through an ice bucket challenge.
Hmm.
It literally feels that way. And if you don't believe me, you can try it yourself. And I also don't, for all the folks who are listening outside the US, this is not 50 degrees Celsius.
Oh, right.
This
Have
is
to
50
specify.
degrees Fahrenheit, which, if roughly, and this is not perfect math, is roughly like 10 degrees Celsius, maybe a little less than 10 degrees Celsius, but that is cold
Right.
for water.
So,
Um,
so
yeah.
without knowing it, I suppose we were we were doing the Andrew Huberman cold plunges before it really became, a health trend.
You did it before. You did the contrast therapy, all those kinds of things before we
No,
even got we even knew as a society that those were a good thing.
no idea. It was just mandated by the coach, time to jump in the pool.
You have no choice. Uh, Speaking of saber tooth esque people, coaches in swimming are the probably a close comparison to having saber tooth tiger parents.
Oh, definitely. Anyone who communicates you through whistle blows, right?
To pivot a little bit, I want to talk about like before we even get into the Inatai thread, I want to talk about how you got into the world of being a capital allocator. Because as far as I know, you went to Berkeley, go Bears, and Berkeley has no class on being a capital allocator. That is not a job that people exit college thinking that they want to do.
Hmm.
What was your foray into being an LP?
That's a very interesting question because I've also asked a ton of other LPs, like, did you grow up thinking that this was what you were going to do?
Yeah,
And
I
I've
came
never
out of the
heard
womb
it.
and I was like, you know what? Capital allocator has my name branded on my forehead.
Exactly. You know what I want to be when I grow up? An LP. Said no one ever. Um, and I think part of that is a little bit by design, right? I think there's a lot of like discretion and confidentiality in terms of folks who tend to control these large pools of capital. And I think, yes, it's definitely a segment of the investment landscape that doesn't receive any press, really, right? The reason why
SEC
you'd be
regulation, compliance, don't want deal flow. Yeah, these are not your words. These are my words, all right? So do not nod your head or shake your head in any way. But I'm telling you, there's restrictions upon restrictions upon restrictions.
yes, I completely agree.
Obviously, your motivation to be a capital allocator was largely because of a friend who was like, how do you know you want to be in growth equity? You need to collect data first. I'm assuming your motivation to continue to stay being an LP has changed over the years, and I'm curious what the most recent motivation for being an LP is for you now.
I really think and this contrast to right like being forced to play piano at the age of 3. Like I actually think this career choice was truly about pursuing something that actually aligned a lot of like my natural strengths and what interests me with right the requirements of what the job entailed. And so I had always been really fascinated about learning about people's backstories and trying to sort of untangle by hearing about them talk about it, what were the specific experiences that really shaped them into who they are today, right? What motivates them, what scares them, what keeps them going when the times get really tough. And of course, that is definitely embedded into a lot of the diligence that we try and systematize in our investment processes when we're selecting for fund managers.
And out of all of the people that you talk to, just like the diversity of talent is incredible. And I'm curious, and we're going completely off script here, but is there something that you've picked up from maybe a real estate operator or from a private equity person or from a venture person that you've eventually worked into your own rotation as an investor today?
So, a lot of the times when I spend time with venture managers, especially the early stage ones, right? Because they'll all say, oh, well, we're looking for really large TAMs with really resilient founders that have a reason to win, right? I actually try and ask them, okay, so, but like everyone tells me that. So, can you get a little bit more specific as to maybe like a nuanced trait that has actually shown to be more highly correlated with successful outcomes? Or conversely, something that other people think is really correlated with success, but you have actually found to be not so much. And I will say that, I think in more recent times, I have found there to be more um, folks in venture that are willing to back founders that don't have the traditional veneers, if you catch my drift, right? So they might not have gone to Harvard, Stanford, MIT, um, and
Berkeley.
done X number of years, right, in a PM function at name your big tech strategic or your right unicorn tech startup. Um, that formula seems to be less interesting, at least to some of these more newer emerging managers, because I think that right it's an area that is so commonly backed that we oftentimes say right like if you have enough capital chasing after an opportunity, alpha is just going to be degraded, right? And so because it is perhaps like become like too obvious of a archetype that people back. I think that people are actually needing to break out of that mold and be more thoughtful as to, what more kind of like first principles characteristics are they looking for, and how could those be demonstrated in ways that actually don't necessarily match these like veneered accomplishments, right?
I'm so curious because the world of I've talked like you and I have talked a lot of LPs across the years, and whereas I'll be honest, like if we were to combine the number of years, you account for like 80% of the years of being an LP, and I account for like 20% of the experience if we were to combine. But there are a lot of LPs who have like a checklist of like a fund manager has to check off these things
Mm,
in order for us to even consider for them to be an investment.
mm,
And some of these things aren't these veneered institutions, or like they're looking for a referenceable track record, large shops, they're looking for all these other things. So I'm curious for you, um, as someone, I promise this is not, I hope this is not too much of a whiplash, but as
mm.
someone who's gotten like only one question wrong on out of 54 questions on your SAT math, I am I'm curious, are there examples of when you get dangerously close to a yes, whether through a checklist or otherwise, and what are the most common reasons where you get really close to a yes but end up saying no?
That's, well, those actually, I mean, they break my heart in some ways, right? Because you had gotten so close to getting over the finish line, but in other
Yeah.
ways, I actually think you need to have examples of those to prove that you do in fact have like a very robust and thoughtful investment process. Otherwise, right, it would almost seem like you're just back solving to
Yeah.
build a process that allows you to do the investments that you were going to do anyways,
Yes.
rather than to us, we always say like investments have to survive the process, and that ends up being what makes it into our portfolio.
Right.
So I would say the most common reason actually why a fund manager might kind of make it all the way through, and then we just can't quite pull the trigger at the end, actually has to do with our long-term perspective, right? So in private markets in particular, we say that we want to underwrite to being able to partner with a firm for at least a decade. So in other words, well, in a more normal fundraising time cycle, probably about 3 funds worth. But think about it this way, right? At the time of evaluation, you may resonate with, and we have this internal framework called the 4 Ps. So it's people, philosophy, process, and performance. So let's say, right, we do resonate with those 4 Ps and how they show up in this fund strategy today. But if there are clear indications that this firm has future ambitions to drastically scale, right? Whether that be through fund size increases or launching additional strategies, what that means for you is it'll reduce your alignment of interests, and perhaps you might not be as excited to partner over the longer term. And so, if confronted with the choice of partnering with a fund that we love today, but can already see sort of the possible scenario in which we wouldn't be up by the next fundraise, we would typically elect to ultimately choose to pass. Yeah, and that's happened to us twice now. Once with a crypto fund, and then once with a software specialist.
I want you to hold that crypto thought in your head because that's something we'll hit in just a bit. You talk about the 4 Ps, but you went over that so quickly. I'd love for you to like take a deeper take on, like a double take on the 4 Ps. And for each of the people, process, performance, I forgot the last one already.
Philosophy.
Philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Could you break down what you would be looking for under each category? Like, what would you be looking for people? But people make sense, but people is also a rather like large semi-amorphous term because any fund has people unless you're investing in like strictly AI algorithmic funds at that point.
Hmm.
So could you just like break like these four things down?
Absolutely. And I think what's so great about this framework is it is consistent and applies across emerging as well as very established managers. So, okay, so again, the four P's. So, people, philosophy, process, and performance. And we like to explain that performance, the last P, right, even though it is the easiest for you to evaluate, it is a lagging indicator, right? And actually, you need to be able to evaluate if the first three P's, if there's cogency there and if there's sustainability, then that is actually what will create the performance over the longer run. So if I start with people, right? We think about it as do you have a stable, experienced team of very high integrity people with the right background of skills, expertise, and relationships to execute on your chosen strategy? Right? You're looking for a culture that actually values having dissenting opinions because this helps you avoid groupthink, and one that embraces humility, especially when it pertains to admitting to and learning from your past mistakes. When you think about philosophy, this should be focused and demonstrate some sort of nuanced or differentiated understanding of the market dynamics that actually create the opportunities that they pursue. And also, very clear cut as to the characteristics that qualify for a down the fairway deal, right? They are not operating based off of FOMO. They know exactly the type of investments that they are best suited to execute upon. And then when it comes to performance, think of it as so it needs to be like a very consistently applied process for how they source, what they'll dig into during due diligence, how IC decisions are actually made, and then who or what resources they are able to bring on and approach their post investment value add creation. And then finally, right, you need to have discipline in doing the buy, hold, sell analyses to actually determine the appropriate time that you should be seeking an exit for an investment, as well as making sure that your fund size is right sized for the strategy that you're seeking to pursue. And with regards to performance, right, again, output from the cogency amongst the first three factors. So when you're looking at that track record, then you want it to outperform the relevant benchmarks across market cycles, right? So this way it demonstrates both resiliency as well as the ability to adapt and react to changing environments. But performance should not be driven by so few deals to the point where it's actually hard to differentiate, right? Whether it was manager skill or luck. And you need to have very tangible examples from your reference calls as to the value creation capabilities that the team brought in helping founders build their businesses. So, hopefully, that wasn't too elaborate, but gives you kind of like a succinct summary of what the four P's that we tend to evaluate funds based off of is grounded in.
Each of the P's can probably be episodes in and of themselves, if not more.
Probably.
And so
Yeah,
I'm swimming with questions in my head right now, and I also want to be cognizant of time. So maybe we'll pick performance for now,
sure.
and we might need to do a part two for all these. So for performance, a lot of LPs index heavily on performance, previous track
Mhm.
record, and all that. And I'm curious for you because you said you still do need some elements of referenceable track record. For you, is there an X number of deals across Y number of years that is the loose minimum of what you would look at in order to have the minimum like referenceable deal flow? And what would X and Y necessarily be? They don't have to be hard and fast rules, but I assume it's not like 2 deals across 1 year.
Right, which is very fair. Well, because if you recall, like I highlighted, a lot of it has to do with you're trying to be able to see if the manager is able to navigate cycles effectively, right? That's the main reason why it helps to have more than one data point and to have it not so clustered within such a short amount of time that maybe you can't even tell if the companies are necessarily going to be breakouts or average or underperformers. I will say though, so again, right, the reason why LPs like us index so much towards performance is because it is the easiest thing to measure, right?
I
um,
completely agree.
and so uh, again, if you truly believe that if there's cogency amongst the first three, they'll produce performance. You should therefore actually be able to underwrite a fund that actually has no performance,
Hmm,
but has very strong indicators across all three of those P's, right?
gotcha.
Um, so I'd say so with regards to venture in particular, right, we do tend to gravitate towards those oftentimes who have a little bit more of operating expertise, just because it gives you a bit more credibility, right? Well, affinity when convincing founders to elect to partner with you, but also credibility when you're trying to provide right recommendations as to how to help them navigate through their journey. As you can say, well, I've actually had to do this before. Um, it's not me just sitting from an armchair giving you advice. Um, and, and so in those scenarios, right, typically former founders will have some form of angel investment track record. And so these are small checks and not necessarily indicative of the types of investments that they might choose to do institutionally through their fund. But nonetheless, right, it gives you something to work off of with regards to perhaps teasing out, right, like the foundations of what they believe made a compelling investment, as well as how they thought about, right, what was a good investment for them that they could actually sort of be value add to. Um, I don't think any of these, at least in the context of Inatai, did not have a track record at the time of our investment. But for example, right, Kazakh is one of our relationships. They're a very well-known VC down in LATAM. Early backers of companies like Nubank, Kavak, Quinto Andar. Um, while I was at Iconic, I do know that they had actually seeded their first fund without any prior investment track record because the two founders were former operators from Mercado Libre. And so had absolutely no investment track record at all. But in that scenario, right, I think they were able to gain enough comfort with regards to the network centrality of these two partners and therefore their ability to source the highest quality deals. Clearly, as Mercado Libre operators, they were able to take a company from its early days all the way through being publicly listed. And then from, I suppose, yes, from a portfolio construction or investment process perspective, um, those would have been things that you would have spent the vast majority of your due diligence fleshing out how thoughtful they were in terms of the way in which they wanted to build that out. So I would say, yeah, you can definitely get to conviction without performance. I think it does up the ante though in terms of how exceptional, right, each of the other three P's has to be.
I have a lot more questions, to be completely honest. But I also know we're running short on time. At a high level, and we'd be remiss not to talk about Inatai at all. So if you could, like, we can figure out how to cut this and on all that. But I'm curious. One of the questions I had is, while you're at Inatai, you built, and feel free to let me know if my research is wrong here. Could have done my homework better, but you built a multi-billion-dollar portfolio from scratch. I am so curious, and maybe this is another episode altogether, but how does one even begin to build a portfolio?
Um,
I'm
uh,
sad that we saved it to the very end of this conversation for me to ask this, but I
no,
had to
no,
ask
not
it.
at all. Not at all. Well, I'd say it was definitely a very collaborative team effort, and without my, so I think part of what we did really right is we were actually very patient in finding and hiring the right team of people that have very complementary backgrounds. Like for example, I actually have a teammate who came over to us from one of our long only managers, right? So he actually has a lot of nuanced understanding into direct investing on the public side. Um, right, other folks like my CIO has extensive experience with risk management as well as tactical trades, implementing those, and then other members of our team have kind of different uh, asset class majors and minors, if you will, right? But I think that having kind of complementary team as well as a super engaged and supportive board in IC is really what made it possible for us to reach what I would now consider, right, more of a steady state portfolio today. And that was over the course of I guess we're reaching 5 years now, but what it looks like from behind the scenes is definitely it's a team of people who need to be willing and have an appetite for wearing many hats, right? So you are tagging in on projects that may not seem to fall within a traditional job description. So the usual sort of work stream, right, of your investment team would be, okay, so you got to source compelling investments, you got to conduct the due diligence, win access, desired allocations, and then monitor developments, right, post investment. But parallel to that, if you're part of a founding team, you also have to build out, right, all of the infrastructure and processes that actually enable you to perform those functions.
That's true, and
Um,
that's a lot more than most people expect.
so it feels sometimes a little bit like building the plane as you're flying it. So again, I think patience and grace is very much needed, but also like an attitude of, it does not always need to be perfectly optimized day one, right? It needs to get to a point where it's usable so that you can get some scalable leverage to your team. And then you can always go back and further refine it, right? So like, for example, for our CRM system, we use Backstop. We started off by designing sort of like the tags in order to organize, right, how we were sourcing investments and like what types of exposure we were getting, all of the great things that you need to be able to run kind of the traditional pipeline funnel page that GPs like to include in their decks. Well, we need to do that for our operations as well. So we had that in place, right? But only recently have we kind of gone in and revisited kind of the way in which we're tagging different strategies, as well as thought through what would be kind of specific reports that we're actually now designing to streamline some of our workflows. Like, for example, we now have a report that helps us monitor all the investments, right? It automatically pulls up the latest quarterlies, for example, by deal lead, or like another one would be a sourcing report that essentially lets us review over the course of, like, let's say the last month.
Yeah.
We score our opportunities on a scale of 1 to 5, and it allows us to review all of the changes in scores that have been made, and what was the rationale behind those changes, right? These additional functionalities, had we tried to implement them day one, I think would have driven us insane. But right now, sort of as we've given some time to actually study, like, what have been some of the pain points, what are the use cases in which we actually want to use this information, it's allowed us to go back with like a much more refined view, and then build in the more optimized version of Backstop today.
I love it. And I'm curious, and maybe this is like a quicker version of it, but what was the minimum viable process for you? You mentioned you had backstop. Were there other things that you had just like in terms of a loose scaffolding of what needed to be set up so you can effectively start allocating?
Yes. So I'd say minimum infrastructure was we needed a CRM, so we selected Backstop, but we've also heard good things about BipSync. A lot of our ENF peers use them, and then a portfolio management tool. So for us, that is Solovis. Other folks use BipSync or Kaisa, and I'd say these are kind of the two main pieces of technical or technological infrastructure that you need to kind of get your investment program off the ground. But because also we were such a lean team, right? Um, to help us get a leg up in terms of uh, landscaping comparable strategies when we were evaluating specific firms. We also needed a subscription to. We ended up selecting SPI because it was both global and then also spanned across asset classes, and so gave us the best coverage. Right, when you don't have a team of 20 people, right, who are able to kind of take the volume of meetings that would help you collect context on a certain landscape of strategies. These types of databases are actually super valuable in terms of, for the most part, doing like a lot of the top of funnel screening for you. So then you can perhaps like double click on the ones that look a little bit more compelling to spend more targeted time with.
I love it. Again, an answer that leads to 15 more questions. Uh, well, to round things out here, and I am so thankful for your time, and I know a lot of our listeners are going to be as well. I'd love to take a step back from all the LP jargon for a second. And maybe my like, let's call it quick fire. You can be as quick fire as you want, but it's one of my shorter questions. And I learned, and I stand corrected because I learned about this yesterday, which I'm like implementing the question now, which is like, as someone who's been writing Yelp reviews since you're an investment banker, I'm curious for you, what are the most underrated spots in the Bay Area for people to try?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So,
This is your
mm,
Yelp elite promotion, by the way. Like,
I
clip
know.
this, and this gets sent out to like Yelp, and that's how you get your Yelp elite.
Please accept me. So, okay. So, for roasted crab and garlic noodles, everyone likes to rave about PPQ in San Francisco. But the pro tip is you can get the same quality right next door, but no lines are waiting at Golden Crab House instead. So, that is my number
Okay.
one pro tip. Um, okay. And then maybe, okay, so maybe I'd say it's not a hot take that I think Mensho is the best ramen in the city. Um, but even for my meat eaters, what you should be getting is the vegan garlic knockout. That broth is like rich umami perfection. And you can always add the char siu back in,
Right.
which I do. I tend to go with duck. But, and then the last one I'd say is like, so a lot of people I think are thrown off by like the gauche appearance of House of Prime Rib. Um, but like don't let that turn you off. The food is actually like phenomenal. um, but yes, if you'd like any more recommendations, it gives me endless joy to send people to places that they also enjoy. And so I actually have my Instagram is entirely dedicated to food. And so it's called Deets on the Eats. So you can ping me for Rex.
Oh, I love it. Deets on
Hmm.
the eats. And is that
Yes,
DEETS on the eats?
it's DEETZ on the
Oh,
Eats. Hmm.
I'm glad we spelled it out because people would be typing an S and they're like, oh, I can't find
I
Charlotte.
cannot find her. Can't find her at all. Yeah.
Those are hot takes. I will also add one more thing to House of Prime Rib. It is phenomenal cuisine, and the tip because if you reserve for two, you have to like book like 6 months in advance. I kid you not. Uh,
Hmm.
if you go in parties of four or more, it is far easier to book a spot than otherwise. You can even do it like 1 week or 2 weeks ahead of time. That's the
Yes.
hot tip. Just bring friends, go there, go on a late night. It's perfect for a Friday night.
I always see those like 9 p.m. reservations available, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you want to eat late, I mean, I want to preach health where I can, but 9 p.m. may be a bit late for some folks. But nevertheless, Charlotte, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Obviously, people can find you on Instagram, which you're actually probably the first person to drop your Instagram handle on the podcast, which is
I'm going to
amazing.
take that as a compliment.
That is a compliment. That is a compliment. More places for people to find you. I will be honest, might be hard to track deal flow that comes
Mm.
that way. But nevertheless, that is an extra channel. Is there any other channel that people should be aware of if they want to get in touch with you, either as an LP who's trying to learn a bit more about the 4P process, because tons more questions there, or otherwise?
Yes, the easiest way is actually probably to email me. So my email is cz@inatai.partners. And yes, I'm always open to trading notes, sharing lessons learned, anything that could be helpful. We we didn't quite touch on this, but I think because of my humble beginnings, I have this philosophy that clearly karma has been very good to me in order for me to occupy this seat before you today. But I'd like to return the favor and keep the door open for other people to also find success in this realm. And so, yeah, that's the philosophy that I operate on.
You've welcomed the swarm. Tons more folks coming your way, but I really, really appreciate that. You are such a kindred spirit, and you're gonna have so many people asking you questions. Maybe Berkley alum, maybe foodies, many people your way. Well, Charlotte, thank you so much. This has been absolutely amazing. I mentioned this earlier. In one way or another, we've got to have you back, and we've got to dive deeper on all these other things.
If you want a masterclass on the 4Ps, I'm down for it.
I love it. I'm holding you to that. This is recorded. I'm holding you to that.
This is recorded, exactly.
This is a binding contract. I will come back. Well, thank you so much. And for everyone else, we'll see you soon.
Passion that distinguishes the best from great.
I want to give a special shout out to today's sponsor, Alchemist Accelerator. Backed by the likes of Coastal Ventures, Mayfield, Salesforce, just to name a few, Alchemist is the top B2B startup accelerator that's been around since 2012, backing founders from day one. And if you've been around for 12 years and running laser focused only on one industry, you build this incredible set of flywheels, and positive feedback loop is absolutely insane. We back the best enterprise talent who go on to change the world in which we live in, who then come back to their hometown, coach, and mentor the next generation of world-class enterprise talent. And don't take it just from me. Alchemist has backed the likes of LaunchDarkly, Rigetti, Privacera, MoEngage, FarmWise, just to name a few, many of which who have come back as mentors and coaches for the current classes of Alchemist. If you're curious and want to get more involved in the Alchemist ecosystem, check out alchemistaccelerator.com/superclusters. That's an S at the beginning and S at the end, and we'll include the link in the show notes below. Till next, stay awesome. Hey Superclusters fans, David from Post here, and if you're tuning in from Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever podcasts find your ear, it'd mean the world to me if you left a review. For those from the YouTube universe, let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, and it'd mean a lot to me if you could share this episode with just one other person who'd get a kick out of today's topics. I'm on the road to publishing to at least 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, review helps me make this experience more helpful, exciting, and fun for you. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. The views expressed in this episode are for informational purposes only and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of Alchemist Accelerator. None of the views expressed herein constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that's all from me. See you on the next.